Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. 2021 marks 35 years since our state implemented the landmark California Beverage Container Recycling and Litter Reduction Act. Known as the Bottle Bill, the program was implemented in 1986 and was designed to be a self-funded operation that accomplished two main goals: reducing litter and achieving a recycling rate of 80% for eligible containers. The Bottle Bill has been considered, or at least was intended to be, one of the most successful and cost-effective recycling and pollution reduction programs in America. The Act has been tweaked and amended over the decades, and the current Bottle Bill system has prevented billions of single-use beverage containers from becoming litter on our streets and landfills. But the California Bottle Bill, some say, has become convoluted. A nightmare is how one observer described it. The system is slow to adapt to changes, often faces significant structural deficits and impacts, and with the continuous closure of recycling centers across the state and consumers more and more sacrificing bottle deposits to grocers and the waste hauling industry, advocates say the Bottle Bill is not living up to its intention of creating the circular economy for California and its recycling consumers. On this edition of Then There's California, we'll look into the history of California's Bottle Bill, those initial good intentions of providing consumers with a return on their bottle purchases while promoting product recycling, the evolution of the act into the bureaucratic vacuum it finds itself in right now, and one state lawmaker's enduring legislative quest to transform and streamline California's broken bottle bill and recycling system. And that state lawmaker is State Senator Bob Wieckowski. Senator Wieckowski represents California's 10th Senate District, including the cities of Fremont, Santa Clara, Milpitas, Hayward, and Castro Valley. Senator Wieckowski's professional and legislative portfolio focus is on job creation, clean technologies, protecting our environment, and reducing unnecessary budget regulations. He chairs the Senate Budget Subcommittee number 2 on Resources, Environmental Protection, and Energy, and he's also a member of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. Senator Wieckowski has been a guest on this podcast a couple of times, sharing his insight and expertise on another of California's myriad of challenges, the lack of affordable housing, and how making it easier for Californians to develop and build accessory dwelling units is already helping put a dent in California's housing crisis. Senator Wieckowski, it is great to have you back here on Then There's California.
Brian, the pleasure is all mine. It's wonderful to be on the Then There's California program and to talk about some of these challenges that California has, based on our reputation, based on who we think we want to be, and actually where we are. So I'm delighted to be here once again with you.
First, just let's check in here for the last 13, 14 months. How you doing? How's the last year or so treated, Senator Bob Wieckowski?
Good. Well, you make the best out of the COVID. My wife and I have acquired 5 chickens, and so we have, I had eggs, I had hard-boiled eggs this morning, and I've planted last season over 100 different varieties of heirloom tomatoes. So I'm a big tomato chicken urbanist right now.
I've had this conversation with some of your colleagues, and it sounds like a lot of you have gone back to the earth this last year.
You find yourself at home and obviously trying not to be bored, but trying to enjoy the time that you have with your spouse or with your children. And my wife has really turned the page on her culinary interest, and she's cooking a lot of New York Times cookbook or bestsellers. The Sunday Times cooking session has become, we're obsessed with that in our house. So it's great, and all the neighbors and some of my colleagues up here have benefited from the excess tomatoes that we grow. So it's fun. I'm done with the pandemic. I'm hopeful to get back to it, but I think there are some lessons that we learned, and just taking walks every day, getting that 10,000 steps on my phone,
right,
is something that I'd like to see the rest of the community continue, because you see your neighbors in a suburban setting, and unfortunately most of us are in our cars and drive into the garage and never see people. And it has been nice to see families walking around and exploring their neighborhood, the place they call home. So I hope we hang on to some of that.
Absolutely. And I assume the chickens will endure long past the pandemic.
Oh yes, we have 3 chickens from last year, and then we just have, I think they're 9 days old, so the little chicks that we picked up. So we have the next generation and chicks, and I've got new tomato plants in. So.
That's delightful.
And the other thing that's brought us together is people trying to find a place where they can recycle their cans and bottles and
Absolutely.
Plastics, because those have all closed down. And during the pandemic, people were at home and they were creating more waste and no place to go, no place to bring them. Recology shut down all of their places, and they were really the number one convenient place for people to drop off their recycled products. So we're in a world of hurt as far as the world of recycling goes in California, and it's terrible that it's to say it, but that's just what it is.
And I think you bring up a good point that as California has dealt with and is now, Lord willing, finally coming out of this pandemic, the normal, quote-unquote, everyday garden variety social and economic and environmental challenges facing the state and our country have not taken a backseat to COVID and have, in fact, been persistent in reminding us that there's still a lot of work to do. And of course, as you mentioned, the complicated challenges and the multi-layered dynamics of the bottle bill. I described at the outset the macro tale of what our bottle bill is and California's recycling goals, but I wanted to have you take us back to the beginning in the micro and tell us about the Beverage Container Recycling Act and the ecological journey environmentalists and the industry and the state have been on over the decades and where we are now.
I think what we should do is really go back 50 years to Gaylord Nelson in the first Earth Day. It was sort of 1970, California in the lead, but America came to a realization that we were polluting our air, we were ruining the environment, and we had this environmental movement that sprung up. And from 1970 to 1986, at least in California, there were a lot of these clubs that would recycle material. They'd recycle cans, newspapers. We had bottles. We didn't really have a lot of aluminum at that time in our beverages, but it was a good stewardship. It was the idea that we're going to pitch in and we're going to manage our waste and reduce our waste. And those clubs, some of them, I know in the Fremont area, we still have the Tri-City Ecology Center. They no longer recycle cans and bottles, but they were the pioneers that did that. And it culminated in 86 when trying to put together a deal that we're going to have a bottle bill. And when you look at that can or that plastic bottle, you see the CRV, and it's the California redemption value. What we did is we had that free market would determine what was going to be your redemption value. And people will wonder, well, I pay a dime for this big bottle, and then I come back and I get a nickel back. And part of that is geared towards what's the world price of petroleum, or what's the world price of glass and silicon to manufacture this stuff. So over the course of 35 years, Californians have subsidized that recycling program. Somebody decides that they want to sell me a beer or a soda or a water, and instead of me renting the vessel that the material comes into, I pay the full cost of it, and then when I bring it back, I get half the cost. So this is what we find ourselves faced with today in the last couple of years, is the sad part of the story for Californians to wrap their arms around is that 60% of the bottles and cans and plastic containers that are part of the bottle bill actually get recycled, which means that 40% doesn't get recycled, which means 40% of the dimes and the nickels that you pay don't get redeemed because they become trash. And we've got to do something about that, quite frankly.
And as we go into the details of this, I think it's important to bring up something that you have constantly reminded us, is that as much as we have been in this state, even going back 50 years ago, considered environmental stewards and looking ahead at the environment and being progressive about recycling, we're not actually that great in the long term anyway of actually implementing these policies and these ideas.
Oh, no. I mean, the bottle bill from 86 has been amended like 92 times. It's got more Band-Aids on it than we know what to do with.
Right.
And there's a lot of advocates that say, well, just put another Band-Aid on. And the challenge is whether you're into glass or you're into plastic or aluminum. Aluminum
right.
is actually does a pretty good job because it holds its price, but there's whole cottage industries that spring up around it. We have all these programs where we give money to curbside recyclers to help educate people how to do curbside recycling, or the plastic industry to create a market for plastics. There's just a whole group of people that get funding for it, but we don't improve the performance. I think Californians, we travel abroad, we travel in the United States, and we think that we're the kings and queens of recycling. We take our things and and put it in our single stream recycling bin. We get the blue bin and we throw everything in.
Right.
And the challenge is that 40% of that gets contaminated. What happens is that somebody doesn't clean out their mayonnaise jar and throws it in there and it breaks, and everything in the garbage truck that gets collected gets contaminated. Not the aluminum is actually survives, but the glass that breaks has a really, really high rate of contamination, and that all goes to the landfill. It doesn't get recycled anymore. It goes to the landfill. Mm-hmm. And we have to break that cycle. So you have that problem with the actual handling, and then as I intimated, the recycling redemption centers, half of those have closed. So
right.
You can't find a place. My dad's going to be 94 at the end of the month, and he stopped recycling. I mean, the guy's got a lot of free time. He doesn't want to spend an hour driving to the one recycling center that's in Union City to wait. The drive's not an hour, but the wait once you get there is an hour. He'll just put his bottles and cans in the curbside. And so he pays, the consumer pays, but they don't get the money back.
And I can understand that. And I even recall a couple of decades ago, living here in Sacramento, before the big blue bin showed up, we had the 3 green containers for paper and plastic and glass. And then all of a sudden it became this big blue container. And we thought, well, how convenient is all this? We don't have to separate it. We just throw it all into one bin.
And it doesn't work. And just think about with the pandemic, how much people are using Amazon and having delivery to their house. I mean, we have so much cardboard right now in our recycling bin. I mean, I spend every weekend cutting up the cardboard boxes that come to the Wieckowski house, during the course of the week.
Sure.
And you see, we have to rethink what we put on the curb. I'm guessing there's money to be made in cardboard. I know in my district, in Santa Clara, we've had a pulp mill shut down because of other economic conditions, and the idea that they can reopen that, create those jobs. I mean, I want everybody to work. I want everybody to have a good paying job, and, but I want to see the recycling rates come up. So what we've come up with, when we look to the world, we look to our neighbors, we say, what's working? What type of program is working? And what we find out, it's an extended producer responsibility, which means that we put the responsibility on the manufacturers who make the bottles. They're in charge. Mm-hmm. They're the ones, if there's going to be a nickel that has to be paid in order to get the program running, they're going to pay it, not the consumer. So the consumer would have a convenient place, many convenient places to drop off their recycling, and they'll get their dime back or their nickel back when they recycle. So that's the big picture. And there's got to be a lot of other changes, obviously. If you make it easier for people to recycle, and think of a vending machine outside your supermarket or at Costco or at Walmart, or drop boxes where you can put your bottles and cans in a plastic container, mark them with your identifier, and then somebody will process them and you get money in your bank account or your debit card or things like that. Something that's seamless, that's really easy for the consumer. The focus has got to be on the consumer. And there's money to be made in these commodities. And what I'm trying to do, I mean, there's many of my colleagues have legislation to deal with the circular economy, single-use plastics and all that. I'm saying that the bottle bill that we're all familiar with, we want to create drop centers and recycling opportunities for consumers. So all that comes out. So we're recycling 90%, because a water plastic container, that can be recycled several times if it doesn't get mucked up with the cat food and the dog food and the other things that get into the single stream recycling. So the idea is you move that out. You let a stewardship program be established by the producers of all these beverages. We'll give them 3 years to get it set up. And what you'll see is the mushrooming of all these different opportunities for consumers to get dropped off. And I anticipate that the grocers will come on board once they see how easy it is. It's not going to be like people remember those convenience zones that we had by supermarkets and parking lots.
And you mentioned the grocers. Under state law, it's up to the grocers and the other retailers to offer, already in state law, to offer the redemption service to customers or face a $100 fee from the state. But many of the stores, like I believe Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and you mentioned Costco, who have this green and progressive reputation, they're willing to just pay the fine every day. It's just the cost of doing business easier than to bear the logistical hassle of redeeming the bottles like they used to, transporting the materials to market, collecting the sale of the deposits for the state. And to their defense, you kind of understand what a hassle that all is.
Right, and a lot of them have just said, okay, CalRecycle, come after us. I mean, CalRecycle is underfunded and overburdened with these programs, and some of them are just blow it off. But that's absolutely correct. Many of them would rather not have that element of people and have people come into their store with all their bottles and stand there at the cash register and sort them out, because they don't have the capacity to determine what the price is if it's supposed to be based on weight. So it's, you know, it's a mess. It's a mess. And, you know, I've gone to Norway and Oregon and British Columbia, where they have an extended producer responsibility, and it's night and day. You know, they have these vending machines where people come into the store, and the grocery stores actually offer people a bonus. They say if you bring in your bottles here and you vend them, and you got to individually put them through, they'll give you 10% more than what the redemption value is. So if you come in with $20 worth of bottles, they'll give you $22, because they know that you're going to walk into their store and buy stuff. And with all the challenges that we have from the pandemic, you would think that the grocers would say, wow, we want to get more people back into the store, because I buy the potato chips and the cupcakes and the ice cream that I don't need, and it's not on the list because I'm walking down the aisles and I see it. Plus, the miraculous thing is that the recycling rate shoots up. You know, we're at 60% right now. All the people that are opposing my bill can say whatever they want to. We're at 60%. We have failed. And we were failing last year and 3 years ago when I introduced my first bill. The improvement hasn't turned up. But in these other areas, you know, Oregon's recycling at a 90% rate. And Maine is recycling, and Michigan, for all the problems that Governor Whitmer has, they're recycling at a high rate because they give you a dime for your bottle and can.
Right. And in fact, your bill, let's get more into the details, SB 38 would create this beverage container stewardship organization amongst the beverage distributors. And in fact, you want to model it after what Oregon is doing, which again, we can't help but not ignore the irony of the fact that here's California, this progressive, ecological minded state, is having to copy what Oregon is doing.
Well, right. But I mean, so what? So what? Again, we go back to 86 and we like to see ourselves as an environmental leader. Well, Oregon's been a pretty good environmental leader. And Oregon has more locations to drop off your bottles than California has. And we have 10 times the population. And let me say that again. There are more convenient drop-off spots and more redemption centers in the state of Oregon, which has 1/10 of our population, than California. And that's just crazy. And it's in rural areas, it's in suburban areas, it's in urban areas. They've developed a template that they have so that they put the consumer first, right? And the way they make money is that if people recycle and they have a minimum content in their beverage containers too, which we have in California, you start changing the behavior. You get the kids and the grandkids and the people from church and the scouts and everybody else start saying, this is what it means to be an Oregonian. This is what it means to be a Californian. I want to participate in this. And you teach your kids about financing and banking, and you know, it is a wonderful experience, and it will be a wonderful experience for Californians.
Right, and the funds, the money that will come back from this consortium of beverage container distributors that you want to create with this bill is to put this money into opening up these new recycling centers, or at least supporting those that have been struggling and have closed down.
Right. The bottom line is that they're going to be responsible. The producers are now responsible, so they're going to, this is business. I want all my Republican friends to say, we're turning over a state program that's broken to private enterprise. And we're saying, private enterprise, you know how to do this better. If you have to pay for the price of the vessel that you have your beverage in and getting that vessel back, they're going to figure out the best way to make it convenient. And they can go to these states, Oregon for one, and copy them. I mean, Oregon has a program for reusable bottles. Anybody who's over 40 years old remembers that we used to clean the bottles and put them back. I mean, we had milk bottles we used to clean them.
Right.
They're doing that now for their craft brewery. They have one bottle in Oregon. If you have a craft brew, whatever, they got a zillion of these breweries, but they have one bottle. Why wouldn't California do that? Because those folks, it's like the wine guys. They want to say we have, you know, it's organic, it's fresh, ingredients that we make, and we want to market that to folks to say we're going to reuse the bottle. Different beer, fresh beer, but same old bottle.
You mentioned the bottles and you mentioned alcohol. That leads me into another element of this, that SB 38 does not include buy-in or participation from the wine and distilled spirits industries, which I know is different from your original intention in your bill last year, SB 372. Again, as you mentioned, you've had a couple of turns at the home base with this. Why the change? What was the reason that you took them out? Obviously, they have been in opposition, and essentially it was the industry that curbed your bill last year. Right. What made the decision for you to keep them out of this latest version entirely?
Well, I wanted to fix the program. I mean, I'm an ambitious person, so I want to bring everybody in, no more carve-outs for different types of beverages, and obviously I faced opposition. We have members here that are not going to vote for a measure that ordinarily they would vote for a recycling measure, but they're not going to vote for a measure that adversely affects their spirit industry or the wine industry. And I realized that Oregon and some of these other programs don't include those. So I thought, and the advocates work with me, let's just convert the bottle bill that we have now, but leave the doorway open for wine folks and for spirits. The wine industry in Oregon, which is booming, they want to do the same thing that the craft beer people. They want to have a recyclable bottle so that they can bring them back, clean them, and do it because, again, that's their signature. That's, when you're sitting there having this wonderful wine that's been grown in this Appalachia with this sort of treatment and this organic bit, you'd like to be able to say, and by the way, this wine bottle that came in here has a low carbon footprint because to make glass producers are part of the cap and trade program. They are one of the heavy emitters like cement and refineries that people have. And I come at it at that way and saying, you folks have to reduce your carbon footprint. And we're going to tag you and let people know that you've got a big footprint because you refuse to have recycled bottles or reusable bottles.
Do you understand the wine and distilled spirits industry's concerns up to this point that they have said they don't want to be in the position to dictate recycling policies to suppliers or to retail or government? They don't think a redemption-style program is an effective way to recycle their products, and that there's not enough clean cullet in the system, the clean recyclable glass in the system that could have and all of this could even have a negative impact on the smaller, you could say, family-owned wineries and vintners. So do you understand that there's a lot that still needs to be addressed to get them to your side of the fence on this?
Oh, yeah. It's going to be a big door. It's going to be a big door, and it's going to be big open, because once we start raising the price on emissions for polluters that make glass, they're going to have to pay the price. So this is not part of our podcast today, but the price of the cap and trade and the allowances is artificially low at $18. Once it goes up to $40, they'll all be walking through the door because they'll realize the bottle's going to cost them $5 to make. It's not going to be a cheap vessel anymore, and they'll want to recycle it. That's how legislation is made. I mean, in '86, there was a lot of compromises that had to be made to try to get the bill across.
Well, and gosh, if it's been amended as many times as you say it has over the last 35 years, then absolutely.
I tried. I can't fix it. It can't be fixed. That's why we take it out. We take it out of CalRecycle. CalRecycle has an oversight responsibility, and we let the people who produce it, because then they're going to take care of those variables that they can control to make it cheaper and to make it easier for folks to recycle. Because once they get that closed loop, they're going to make money. I mean, there's a bunch of money sitting in the program right now because obviously 40% of the people haven't gotten their nickels back because it's just gone into the trash. It's just in the landfill. Again, we're not charging the landfill the price that they should for the emissions of the methane and the carbon that's coming off of from that. We're trying to get things out of the landfill, not putting more things into the landfill.
And ultimately, again, you're telling the distributors, this is a circular economy. You need to take ownership for the product coming back to you that you put out in the first place.
Right. I mean, the distributors are the gateway here because in the industry, there's a big concern about Colorado or New Mexico, all these big truckloads of recycled products coming into California where they don't have recycling, and pirates coming in and cheating the system. It'll all be barcode. It'll all be barcode, so you'll know exactly who's recycling.
You'll be able to trace from point of purchase, essentially, to return.
Right, and you'll know, and you'll say, okay, Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola can compete and say who does the best recycling in California. And make it fun again to be an environmentalist and to be a recycler, and to say our church group got together and we decided that we're going to raise money to send the kids to Disneyland or wherever they want to send them.
Right.
And we're going to ask everybody to use our barcode so that we collect money. And that's part of the civic engagement.
I think you bring up a good point. This is supposed to be fun. And those endorphins that we get when we throw those bottles into the bin and think we're wonderful environmental stewards doing this, that in fact, that should be genuine. We should be able to feel good about this and know that our contribution to the recycling system is actually a good thing.
Right. When we reach 90% recyclable rates, then we can brag with some authenticity.
We've got a little ways to go, it sounds like.
Because we're bragging right now, but it's not happening. And we have that feel good notion. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but people put all kinds of recyclable products in the blue bin, like hoping, this is a broomstick and I think it's made out of plastic, and those are not really, it's wishful recycling. And that education program has to go in. Also, again, you subtract all the recyclable bottles, all the things that are in the bottle. That's a big portion of what goes into that bin, and then you're left with your cardboard and cat food.
Once again, you bring up a great point that a lot of this is indeed education and awareness, letting consumers know what's happening to their recyclables, to their deposits, and even further educating them still here in 2021. People don't know what recycling is, that they will throw the soiled peanut butter jar or the mayonnaise jar in without cleaning it, and that, again, that stewardship, when they place this allegedly recyclable product in the bin, they need to have some education and some understanding of what they're doing and where it goes.
Brian, we're not going to reinvent the wheel here. I mean, people have some idea. They just have gotten lazy or bad practices. There are some people that they don't understand the different colors of the bins and they just throw things in.
Well, right. How many sandwich wrappers and soiled styrofoam food containers have you found in a blue recycling bin?
Right. Lots.
Yes.
And batteries and things like that we don't. So we try to skinny it up by taking the bottles out and take advantage of what I think is the spirit of Californians. We like to identify as environmentalists. We like to think we're good stewards. So you say, okay, let's have a partnership. Let's have a stewardship program that's run by private businesses, the people that bring us these materials and the fine beverages that we consume, but let them run the program. Let them help educate us. Cal Recycle will do their portion of it. But when I was in Portland, I was amazed at going into one of these bigger centers where they have, you can vend or you can drop stuff, and they had a person that was there signing you up, getting your information, and so that they can give you this identifier so that you would get credit for it. People would come in from their cars. They'd have all these little trays or carts. They'd fill them up, put them in, drop them off, and it was like the Norman Rockwell, town square, that sense of, hi, Bill, hi, Martha, how are you doing? And I stood there for like 40 minutes or something like that, and it was really encouraging to see.
It was a little bit of Americana.
They walk out and they say, I got $27.
Right, exactly. So they saw the return.
Right.
You sound very hopeful about this, and your positive attitude about it is inspiring and encouraging. You have had a lot of so close and yet so far moments with this issue, and the same could be said, as we've already said, about much of California's attempts to streamline and reform our laws and the regulations related to environment. Is it confounding and frustrating for you? Or maybe I should rephrase it and say, how confounding and frustrating is it for you to deal with this, something that should be so intuitive to us, but the devil is in the details, and even environmentalists and progressives are not lockstep on this process?
Oh, yeah.
Is that frustrating for you?
Sure, because I think politically people like the status quo. So let's just throw that out there. As people, they're familiar with the status quo, they like it, they're educated about it. They say, if you just gave me more money on my tipping fees, then I can stay in business. Or if you just didn't hit me with $100, my grocery store would be more successful. Or if you just give us more funds to subsidize rural locations so that they would have access to folks. I mean, everybody's got an idea of what they want to do, but the bottom line is that people aren't finding these places. It's just we've gotten to the point where it's so inconvenient for the consumer. Like, I go back to my soon-to-be 94-year-old dad. He's just given up. He's not going to do it. And if you put it on the curbside, you're at a 60% rate. So, I continue to talk to my colleagues. I think The opposition will remain the opposition. I think not having spirits and wine in it is a big chunk of it. Mm-hmm. And there are discussions going on right now that the wine industry wants to try to figure out what they're going to do. You know, Gallo has got a proposal that they don't want to be part of this system, but they know they have to do something because the cost is getting higher and will get higher because of the glass material or cullet that they have. You're not getting enough clean stuff. And we've learned the Chinese are not taking our recyclable.
Right.
The reason they're not taking our recyclables, folks, is because it's so dirty. The contamination rate that we have from our MRFs is so high that nobody wants it. Now, you go to Norway, and they've got it all crystal clear. You look at, they separate their green plastic from the clear plastic. It looks like a hospital. I mean, it's the place is unbelievably clean. And if the Norwegians can do it, California can do it.
Yes, we should be able to do it. Well, in fact, SB 38 passed out of its first policy committee. Am I correct?
Yes.
So what are the odds of success here, notwithstanding the challenges you've had the last couple of years? What are the odds of success on this bill moving forward to the governor's desk?
Well, I mean, I have many of my colleagues, at least in the Senate, have straight up said that they didn't vote for 372 because it had wine and spirits in. So before I amended it or before I reintroduced it, I said, okay, if I take this out, which I didn't want to do. I mean, I'm an emotional guy anyway. I didn't want to do it because I thought, we're talking about 1 billion bottles of wine and spirits.
Indeed.
And that's a lot of glass that's not there that will end up in the curbside, and somebody may be able to separate that. But again, that gets broken, and it's just the same, it's there with the mayonnaise and the ketchup. It's just sort of a bad thing. So I feel confident as I count noses that we're going to get through the Senate. But the reality is that nobody can say that the system works. And I've sent out signals because of the state that the budget's in that I'm willing, as the budget chair, to create this 3-year window where we get recyclers and we get grocery stores ramped up, so when it becomes an extended producer responsibility program in 2024, that the industry is ready to make the transfer, because we do need more sites. There's no doubt about it. We need vending machines, and there's no doubt about it.
Right. Just ending on a quick personal note, looking back at your career, where in the course of your study and career did the light go on, albeit a energy-saving LED light, I'm sure? When did the light come on for you with deciding that conservation and preserving natural resources and ecology and environmentalism was where you wanted to direct a passion?
It probably, my first job out of Cal was in Washington, D.C. with Don Edwards. So this was 1977 to 82.
Former congressman.
Congressman. They got the wildlife refuges there. Mm-hmm. So I did environmental and energy stuff. And Jimmy Carter came in with his energy program, but the wildlife refuge was created in 73, but it grew. And now you got Vic Fazio Wildlife Refuge here.
Right.
So I was around when people were planning, how do we preserve our resources and how do we, save this for generations going forward? And there were efforts on recycling at that time, and solar energy was introduced, and Jerry Brown had his Office of Alternative Energy, which is Mary Nichols ran back in the 70s, and there was hopefulness that government can do good, that people that went into government thought that I can change the world and I can make it more just for people on civil rights and criminal rights and things like that, but more just on the environmental side, that we're not going to contaminate folks. We're going to try to clean up the air, but we're also going to be good stewards of these resources that we have. So I would guess, I could have been in college too, but around that time, late 70s sort of a thing.
Well, I appreciate here we are, circa 2021. Thank you for all your work to change the world one bottle at a time. Good luck with SB 38 as we go through this session. And thank you again, Senator Bob Wieckowski, for being with us here on Then There's California.
It's my pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
Glad to have you. And that does bring us to a close of this episode of Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical assistance and production support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brolte, Brian Shadden, Rainier Sabiniano, Gunjan Patel, John Roman, McClina Woods, Lisa Murphy, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. And on behalf of State Senator Bob Wieckowski of Fremont in California's 10th Senate District, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.